Hey, hello, luminous soul. Welcome back. I am Lori Andrus, and welcome to today's episode of the Luminary Life podcast. Today, as we sink into conversation, I want to call forward the part of you that is always a little bit ahead of the curve, that lives a bit on the edge of what is regarded as traditional or normal. I know that you can identify with this part of yourself. I think this is an innate part of the spiritual journey, and especially for those of us who are looking at pathways of connecting with earth-based spirituality, some of the other like energy healing practices. There are so many things that are kind of, a little on the edge in our traditional culture. And I think, as we lean into conversation, I want to lean into that part of ourselves. And I also want to speak to that part through the lens of being innovative, progressive, forward-thinking, independent thinking, and wildly creative. Yeah, this is where we're going to lean today. We're going to lean actually into the energy of innovation and harvest. Where I want to go, we're in this harvest season, and during harvest season, during the fall, we're looking. It's a beautiful opportunity to pause, slow down, and reflect in our lives on what is ready to be harvested, what's ready to be received, what's ready to be set aside to be replanted, to really consider where we are, what we're doing, where we're going, all of those things. It's such a wonderful, reflective time. And as we lean into this season, one of the things that I think is often talked about a lot, but not always really clear in the area of our spiritual path, our soul's journey, and that's the harvest. We talk about harvesting a lot, but there's some nuances within the harvest that I want to lean into today, especially for those of you who identify as being ahead of the curve, being innovative, being progressive, being forward thinking. This episode is for you. And it's something that has been really stirring in my awareness this season. It kind of caught me by surprise. As we begin, I want to share with you a story that was shared with me a couple years ago by one of the members of the sanctuary, a friend of mine who, as we were leaning into this harvest time, she recalled a time in her life when she was harvesting garlic and the cloves of garlic. And she talked about the process. They would go out on one of the coldest days. The weather was just not very pleasant to be out in, and they would dig up all of the garlic and they would separate it in the process. They would put on the side all the cloves, and then they would make a very special pile of the most robust, juiciest looking, like most amazing garlic cloves. And so they would make this smaller pile of those cloves, and then they had this other this bigger pile. And at the end of the day, that smaller pile of the largest, juiciest, most amazing cloves, that would be used to be replanted for next season. Those cloves were set aside not to be savored and cooked into delicious dishes, but to be replanted. And I remember when she shared this story, I remember just kind of feeling myself lean back and pause and like really feel that the energy of replanting the most decadent pieces, the most decadent bits of the harvest. And I realized that I wasn't doing that in my own life. It wasn't even something I had considered. And I found that really interesting. And in many ways, one, I've never grown garlic. And as a child, My family had a really robust garden. We grew everything from corn to tomatoes to pumpkins and peas and beans, and oh my goodness, you name it, we had it. It was an amazing garden. And at the end of the year, we harvested everything. Throughout the year, we were harvesting, berries and whatnot. But at the end of the year, everything was just completely clean. And the garden was tilled under, and we started fresh the next year, either with fresh plants or fresh seeds. And we purchased those every year for our garden. So in my mind, the harvest was a completion. It was like bringing things to a point of close. And so you harvest everything. So the idea of putting something aside had just never really occurred to me. What that would look like from the place of harvesting in our lives. And so I started to really consider that. And then this season, as I was leaning into the season, I began to notice something else, a kind of a curiosity or a question that was coming forward for me, like finding myself in a bit of a bind around this idea. And the bind being that I really see myself as an innovative individual, and that I'm very often on the front end of whatever is unfolding in the world, with a new layer of what's being laid down and created and developed. And I realized that part of how I identify is to be wildly creative, dive into a project, bring it to completion, and then move on to the next. Who can relate to that piece of moving on to the next? Yeah, I think this is something that is a really big thing in our world and in our culture. We create, we bring something into form, and we move into the next thing. When we look at, social media and some of the things that are happening in our world, you even think about like Hulu and Netflix and all the wonderful channels that we have where we can literally deep dive and binge watch like just an endless amount of television, movies, reality shows, on and on and on. But what we're not always aware of is that on the other end of that is a creator, someone who's created that. And, you being creatives, you being innovative individuals, I'm sure you've thought about this, but there's also the part of us that just indulges and loves the deep dive of the binge, right? And the ways that our mind tunes out when we just sit and scroll and just delight in one punchy video after another punchy video after another, or great photos and imagery, or beautiful messages, well spoken, or written in such an eloquent way that it just pulls our heart forward. The thing is, when we scroll through, we have this consumption, this like kind of just rapid fire consumption. But the consumption isn't the type that savors the pieces that are coming forward, the information. We're not really harvesting to the depth that's possible with what's been created. And I say this from the place of receiving others' creations, love, and from being a creator and what I'm receiving from my own creation. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I think there's kind of this like interesting energy around how we're harvesting and allowing ourselves to fully receive from what is being and what we are creating. And I think with the onset of AI, which I absolutely love, and I'm so grateful for the many ways that it has created more fluidity for me in my life and in my work and in my world, but the rapidness of creation has picked up yet another pace. It moves at a whole new level of momentum than it did before. And I feel like one of the things we're really being invited to consider at this time and in general, as creatives, as innovators, as progressive, forward-thinking individuals, is to consider where and when and how we are harvesting and receiving from what we've created. So this past week, I had a really interesting experience. So I guess we'll set the story up, kind of taking a look backwards about 2 years ago, and maybe even further, but we'll start 2 years ago. So about 2 years ago, I just felt really compelled to dive back in and renew my occupational therapy licenses. And that looks like a state license and a national license, and it requires quite an in-depth process. It took me about a full year to go through all of the steps, largely because I'm, doing other things at the same time, and life is unfolding. But it was a big process. There were a lot of steps involved, and it really, opened up a part of myself that was curious about how the practice has evolved and changed over the period of time since I left, which was in 2008. I was curious about just a lot of things. And what's fun, when you open the right, hole of information or content, you can just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's what I found myself doing. I was absolutely delighted. Well, I didn't have any real clear intention or defined, this is what I'm going to use this license for once I've renewed it. A part of me had a couple different ideas, but nothing really definite. And I just rolled with that. I just trusted that this was a part of the process that I was being called into. And I'll share with you as we move forward in this story what I'm noticing now about that. But this year, as we were stepping back into the school year, Chris was coming home and beginning school, I was really kind of having this feeling like, oh, it'd be nice to just pick up a short-term or a part-time OT position in the schools and just really get my feet back in and see, experience, feel into it, discover. And I had done some digging, but didn't really find what I was looking for. I had put my resume together, cover letter. Last year, I felt called to reach out to some people for references. I mean, I had all the things pulled together. So randomly, a former colleague of mine just sent me a message with a position that was potential showing up. And it was very, very part-time, which was exactly what I was looking for. And I kind of went, oh my gosh, here it is. This is it. So that led me to digging in even more. I came across another very, very, very part-time position. I put in my resume for it, got a call almost immediately, and went in for an interview. And the interview was last week. And so after the interview, I was driving home and I was reflecting on the conversation. Part of the interview was them sharing what the position would look like, what types of students I'd be working with, what, facilities, all the things, like kind of just the basis. And during the interview, I was just kind of receiving the information. And afterwards, I was reflecting on it. And I just almost laughed out loud, because what they were sharing with me was a position that 20 years ago, when I was working as a school-based occupational therapist, I was a big part of developing the programming for students in this service model. And it was at that time cutting edge, ahead of the curve, innovative, way outside of the box. It definitely hit some resistance. And I was so excited about it because I could see the potential and the possibilities and the ways that it could shift and evolve the practice. But I left before I got to really see how it took hold. And so I was always a little bit curious, though I had kind of forgotten about it. We move on with life, right? And I had moved on and been doing, lots of different things since then. And here it was, this program that I was really key in developing in a different school district many, many years ago, has not only taken hold in that school district, but it's become a standard practice in other districts as well. And to me, that was so exciting to see this thing that was progressive and innovative become standard practice. Wow, how cool is that? So one of the things that, I was thinking about as I was reflecting on that story and that journey, and also reflecting on this piece of the garlic and planting the seeds, like replanting the garlic cloves. Sometimes when we replant, we're not replanting for ourselves to come back and directly harvest from it immediately. Sometimes we're replanting for others to come and step in and tend to the process and bring it into life, bring it into form in its next step. And other times we're called back in that beautiful spiral of life to revisit what has been planted, what's been tended to, and to allow ourselves to again be part of the tending, but also to receive from its harvest. And I feel like there's something around that energy that is calling me back into my own roots, the roots that established my pathway as a professional, as an adult, in my adult career path, which was it began as an occupational therapist and evolved into energy work and all art and jewelry and crystals and stones and so many other things. But being called back into it feels like a time of revisiting, how can my roots be deepened? How can I strengthen them in this foundation? How can I strengthen my foundation and allow myself to receive from it simultaneously? I think very often in life, and especially on a spiritual path, we're looking at how can we, connect and deepen? How can we move forward? How can we create? How can we expand? How can we expand? And often we forget or overlook the aspect of the harvest and allowing ourselves to receive as part of that expansion. Now, when I look out into my own journey and into the world, I feel like this is one of the places where innovators are kind of caught in a bit of a paradox. We could call this the innovator's paradox. They are ahead of the curve. They're creating, they're visioning, they are landing a new idea and bringing it into form to one level. And then the next vision pops in, it grabs hold, they ride into that, and they forget to harvest. Can you relate? Hand up, I can. I absolutely can. And I just, it's funny because this week, as I was looking at and reflecting on, all of these pieces with OT, because I'm like, why is this coming up right now? What is this? What is it? What about this is showing up? What did I not complete in the past? And I wasn't asking the right question. That's what I realized. I wasn't asking the right question. It wasn't about what did I not complete in the past. It was about how are my roots ready to deepen and strengthen? How is my soul ready to receive from what has been planted in my world at yet another level? And how am I contributing to the next chapter and vision for that area of practice? Given all of the other tools and resources and practices that I have developed along the way, I want to invite you to just consider this for yourself. How in your own life are you being called to deepen your roots and to receive? I think sometimes when a door from the past reopens, we can have a lot of emotion around that. We can feel shameful. We can feel embarrassed. We can feel like perhaps there was a failure or a misstep, or we did something wrong, or we're going backwards. But the reality is we are in fact moving forward with greater vision, greater understanding, deeper connection. And we're bringing something entirely new to that experience. Yeah, this is really beautiful. All right, so I want to invite you to just drop in for a couple minutes. We're going to just drop in together and do just a bit of a heart connection with the energy of harvesting. I feel like when we look at the ways we're journeying through life and we're allowing our soul to lead and be expressed and to expand, this creative energy shows up, right? And so there's the energy of creation, and every creation needs some sort of container to allow it to land, to have a specific space and to find energy and texture and flow and rhythm. And then from there, we move into allowing it to be nurtured and root and develop. We tend to it. So there's this plant, tend to, growth, harvest, a big harvest, and then a replant. So I want to just sink into a little mini harvest ritual with you. So let yourself just bring your hands to your heart center and take a couple nice deep breaths. You can let yourself just close your eyes if that feels right, or keep them open if you prefer. And let's just step into the garden of your life. Yeah. The beautiful thing about the garden of your life is that everything moves in its own rhythm and season. So something that is in fall in one area of the garden, there may be a spring or a summer or a winter in other areas. Let yourself just gaze over this garden and just notice the many phases, the many chapters that are unfolding simultaneously. And as you're gazing over this garden, let your attention and awareness be drawn to those that are in fall, those that are ready for a harvest. And let yourself just make your way over to what you're noticing is ready to be harvested. And let yourself energetically receive within this harvest. And also recognize what wants to be replanted for next year's harvest. Just breathe with this. Let it all be in your awareness. No need to rush or move into the next step. Just be here. Be present. Wonderful. And let yourself just bring that energetically into you. Harvests can look like a lot of things. And notice how it's showing up for you. And let yourself, most importantly, receive that energetic transmission of harvest that nourishes and nurtures your being. And as you're receiving, I want to also invite you to replant. Yeah, little by little, just replant gently, with love, with gratitude, with honor, so that your harvest in the coming season is even more robust. So that your soul is expanding in a way that feels steady and even and consistent for you. It's inspiring and activating. It keeps you engaged. It feels fresh and new. And you may notice that there are times when it is time to release something that's been created that you're harvesting from. And I want to invite you to do that if that is what feels right for you. And as you're releasing, let yourself replant for those to come, those who follow you. And let yourself really wholly receive with love and gratitude. Wonderful. And as we bring this harvest to a close, I want to invite you to just drop your awareness into your heart and into all that you've received. And let yourself just affirm that you honor your harvest. I honor my harvest. I replant my strongest seed. And I trust the rhythm of my expansion. I honor my harvest. I replant the strongest of seeds. And I trust in the process and the rhythm of my expansion. Beautiful. And then let yourself just gently bring your awareness back into this moment, back into this space. Yeah. Take a nice deep breath, just coming on back. I want to thank you for joining me today. I would love to hear about your harvest stories and what you're harvesting in your world at this time. It's interesting. I think sometimes we're called to spiral back into something that we've been a part of, something we've created, a chapter in our life. And in many ways, it doesn't always make sense, but yet our soul is calling us back there. And there's something to be received. There's some other way that our energy is required to expand the creation. There's a way that our soul is longing to receive from something we've created. And I think this is a really beautiful thing. I think this is an interesting energy, one that isn't real easily or readily understood in a logical way. But if you tune in from an energetic place, I feel like this will be resonant. And I'd love to hear what comes forward for you, what you're seeing, and how this reflects in your own life at this time, what's showing up. All right, so I wish you a really beautiful day, sacred friend. And as always, shine brightly. Bye for now.